Hello friends, I hope you're doing well today. Welcome to this third video in my little series on how to stop being weak and how to build spiritual character. If you watched the first two, you'll know I believe that modernity is destroying the soul of men and it's time to wake up and realize how we combat that. Now, with this in mind, we're going to speak about virtue today, specifically masculine virtue. And you could say, well, why is it masculine? Isn't virtue just a transcendent value in and of itself? And that's a really good point because properly understood, virtue is something like a reflection of the light of God. However, why it's masculine is because its expression has been channeled into the male form. And this aids us in balancing how we approach both our own lives, but also serve the tradition, the society, our families, and God, all at the same time by adhering to these virtues. Now, I think we could say that virtue has a very old worldly feel, and that's not a coincidence. You know, in materialist secular modernity, ideas of sort of chivalry, of being noble, of being brave, they're seen as something from yesteryear, from a bygone generation of unenlightened, idiotic people who were violent. And now we're sort of enlightened and clever and scientific and so on. But you may have noticed that there's this lack of adventure that men have. There's a lack of purpose, a lack of meaning. Everything's almost been drilled down to the lowest common denominator, the mass consumer, if you will. And men these days find meaning more in computer games and the adventures they'll have there, or chasing women, or earning money. And these are all really facsimiles of true meaning. You know, what the male soul really yearns is connection with that virtue. That's his divine path, if you will. But again, the idea of divine paths, initiation, not very trendy in this day and age, even ripe for mockery, as we'll explore. And like I say, this renders the modern man the consumer, or worse still, the Kuma. You know, someone who basically just expels his vital life energy for no reason at all. He's detached from the great chain of being in many senses. And I explored recently the archetype of the king on my Substack. Do go and check it out down below. It's linked in the description. And I was saying how, you know, when you don't have that king figure, men can't only wake up that mature masculinity in themselves, but they have nothing to guide them in the society. There's no star, if you will, that organises everything in the hierarchy. It's where C.S. Lewis, who was a famous Anglican Christian, many of his contemporaries wished him to be a Catholic, but he was very loyal to Anglicanism for whatever reason. But he famously stated that where men are forbidden to honour a king, they'll start honouring millionaires, athletes, film stars, even prostitutes and gangsters. And again, on first reading, that sounds a bit extreme. You know, would really men really, you know, worship a millionaire or an athlete or even a prostitute? Well, look at rap. You know, this is exactly what they are, aren't they, really? Look at modern football. You know, a lot of these people couldn't care less about you, but we worship them, and very often it's degenerate. I know there's always one out there who says, you know, there's conscious rap and a really good political rapper, or Illmatic by Nas, and yeah, I get it. There's some stuff there that's not bad, but broadly speaking, it's a very corrupt worldview. It's all about materialism, status, wealth. And even when you look at modern pop stars, I mean, I'm someone who tries very hard to stay away from the lustful side of life because I've realised it's very much poisoning for me, but also my faith journey. And I believe it's very damaging for men. And one thing I've done is obviously stay away from things like explicit imagery that you'll see in pornography, but even things like pop music. Because once I started to live this way, I realised it's basically just softcore porn now. You know, the way they dance, the things they wear. It's the stuff, again, before the internet was around, and I remember this age when I was a young lad, you'd see in magazines, you know, so it's just almost this celebration of the prostitute and the prostitute culture. Any big pop star of the age, I don't know, Beyonce, Shakira, when they release their video, are they really just going to be modestly dressed like a normal woman? Of course they're not. They're basically dressed like they're ready to go to bed with somebody. That's not a coincidence. You know, it's the pull of lust which is pulling you lower. Again, if you want more explanation of this, go back to the video before this if you haven't seen it on the pull of the world. It's not to say sex is bad. It's not to say the beauty of a woman is bad. It's how it's used. That's what matters, and how it affects your soul. By all means, we can engage in it in a healthy way, but not when it's used to corrupt you and others. So this is point number one. We remove the king. We will sink low into the world, and we'll start honouring the ugly, really. Although it might have a beautiful facade, beneath it, it's ugly. Ugly because it destroys your soul. And I think we also see this, especially in England, but I think it's a big thing across the Western world now, in satire culture. If anybody tries to achieve anything or do anything, they're very ripe for satire. And again, this is a model to pull everything down to earth. And in one sense, there's a Christ-like quality to satire. The guy who's getting too big for his boots, it's a way to undermine him. It can be quite a good political tool to shield, if you like, against tyranny. And while it's fair to say as well, a lot of the satire of our age is brilliant, like The Office, big fan of The Office. Very, very funny, really, really clever. But at the same time, there's something sad about our era in a way as well, in that we don't really have those figures who represent that divine path, that kingly path. Those guys we can really look up to, have a mythology around them. And I think we suffer for that, because again, it just renders us back down to this sort of dull, humdrum, one-dimensional life. That's all there is. And again, I don't think that's all there is. I think our souls look to and yearn for something transcendent. And when we remove those dimensions, and while we can laugh and have fun, when the laughter ends, there's nothing really there for us to aim towards other than more deconstructionism. So in a sense, I'm not saying we shouldn't have satire. That's not what I'm saying. Again, it's how it's used. And we think about deconstructionism as a very core element of leftist ideology in the latter 20th century. Jacques Derrida and people like that. The idea that you're breaking down the sense of meaning in order to rip apart hierarchy and supposed oppression. Well, that's all well and good, but then you have this world of total equality, which will never really exist. And not to mention, you make a hell of a lot of mess anyway while you're doing it, but you've also ripped apart the nobility of the structure which gave men virtue. That's not to say there's a shadow side to hierarchies, there very much can be. But there's a light side too, and that's something that men aren't being told in this day and age. So what I'm aiming to do in this video is to try and point you in the direction of re-enchanting your soul, of allowing that process to happen. And I understand it's easy to look foolish here. If you make a wrong step, you will be ripe for satire, and perhaps rightly so, especially if the ego gets involved. If you're playing the big I am, or thinking we're somehow spiritually superior, we haven't really learnt the truth of the message. And when we talk about enchanting the soul, the real thing is to realize that there is a higher order within you that you can actually attain and reach. However, we very often need a master or a guide to take us there in that journey of realization, because it's very, very difficult. And if we start by ourselves, we'll very often look foolish. I think a good way of noticing a genuine master is someone who understands that they're fallen. And this is a real issue of the age that I think is really damaging for men. Men yearn for leadership. They yearn for the wise leader, the wise father, someone who'll show them the ropes. And they just don't get it in this day and age. Now, I'm not blaming, our fathers. I think they didn't have it either. And it comes back again to the spiritual collapse. But the point is, we just haven't had it. And what we do instead is we find these worldly figures. They might be the athlete, the film star. It might be the YouTuber you like. It might be Andrew Tate. And we sort of worship that person. And it's in a way, there's a very instinctive and beautiful yearning there for the elder, for the initiation, which is non-rational. But what happens is when we worship a man or we meet our hero, we get disappointed. There's a reason why there's a phrase, never meet your heroes. And this is because we realize they're just men. And they might be capable of brilliant things, but they're also fallen. I've had a chance to do a lot of men's work in my life, run men's groups in London, all that sort of stuff, work with guys one-on-one. And I've known now, after working and getting to know hundreds, if not thousands of men very, very well in this work, that every man is flawed. And it's all right to be flawed. It really is. It doesn't mean some men aren't brilliant, but often you'll find the brilliant men are flawed. And that's the nature of life. We have to understand that about everyone. Everyone's got their failing, and that's all right. And the real master will know that. He will know that he's limited. And this is why he'll point us towards the reality of life, the true reality of transcendence, where virtue comes from. And the idea isn't so much that we're virtuous, but virtue flows through us when we're open. Our hearts and minds are open and connected with God and the tradition, and it courses through us. And this is why, again, when you really meet someone who's really worked on themselves and been on that journey, they'll very often say, it's not me that's doing this, it's my connection, it's working through me, and they're very humble with it because they know they're limited. And if you like, that's how the virtue is working through. Now, if you think about something like feminist culture, which in a way is an outgrowth of liberal modernity, you would say, that would say, well, spiritual dimension is nonsense anyway. So it brings us down to the material. Well, when we don't have the spiritual dimension, we have no authority upon which hierarchy can be structured. So you might say in the Christian tradition, which I think is beautifully structured, that God is love. So that means that throughout the hierarchy, ideally speaking, remember we're fallen, so it doesn't work like that very often, it's God's love is trickling down. Now, because we're fallen, we interpret it the wrong way, we get egoic, and so on and so on. All of the things you've heard about the church, religious people, spiritual people, yeah, it's all true. But it doesn't mean the structure's wrong. And this is what I want to get to in the feminist culture too, because it denies, if you like, the sacred side of life. And then it throws on top of that, well, the masculine authority, the hierarchy, it's just oppression. What that equals is the journey of growth for a man to turn into a patriarch is just a journey of oppression. And this is so tragically sad, because I believe in human societies, we desperately need the wise, loving patriarch. If you remove that, you're screwed. The patriarch plays the role. He looks to Jesus to learn to play the role of the true father. And of course, Jesus learns from God. That's the biblical line of love, if you will. God, Christ, man, and then woman, children. But it's not women. He's not over women and children to oppress them. He's over to protect them and love them as Christ loves and protects us, and God loves and protects him. That's how it's structured, right? And this is why I think it's so sad that I was having a chat with a friend in a spiritual community I'm involved in, not so long back, and he was saying, he wasn't aware of my political views. If most of them are, I'm really conservative. They wouldn't be very keen on me. The open-mindedness goes out the window when you have more conservative understanding of things. It's like I was saying to my friend who's grew up in a very Irish Catholic background back in Ireland, and he lives in the UK now. And we were joking around saying in modern London, it's more controversial now to say I'm conservative than it is to say, I'm gay. And it's made out like, being gay, it's such a big deal. But in London, you'll be celebrated, pride parties. If you're conservative, you're treated like a gay guy was in the 1940s or 50s, You're like some outcast, something wrong with you. But look, my understanding is that this isn't rooted in hatred. This is a rooting in love. You need hierarchy and structure and boundaries to protect everyone and aid them grow in their spiritual journey. But anyway, this fellow was saying to me, not the Irish friend, the other fellow I was talking about before, I've come from a very patriarchal background, so it's very toxic and oppressive. I thought, you poor soul, this is exactly what modernity does to men. Now, I'm not saying that his background wasn't oppressive, and I'm not saying that they didn't try and follow a patriarchal model that was very toxic. I'm saying that he's misreading patriarchy as evil because of the actions of some toxic parents. And that's the problem with modernity on the whole. We think the whole thing is bad. And what that tells us is that there's no need for masculine virtue, masculine growth, masculine hierarchy. But that's not true. There is nothing like a wise and loving, authoritative father. They create stability, they act in truth, they act in love, and they create, wonderful men in our society. They're not perfect, but they're much more stable, they're much more capable. And with that, they create women as well, who are happy to get married, who don't need to turn to whoredom to try and find a sense of self, who don't need to compete with men because they feel loved by men. It's my belief, actually, that a lot of feminism stems from two things. Number one, it's men giving up on themselves. And number two, there are elements of oppression in there. I wouldn't defend that, masculine cruelty to women. That's a sin. It's a betrayal of your duty, your masculine duty. But when they say, what we want equality, blah, 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 and so on, I don't think that's what they really want. Because if they had equality, they'd be like men. And then you have to act like a man. In my experience, most women that I've known, as in sort of a friendship way, even though I'm not really a big believer in male-female friendships, and certainly in my romantic life, they really respond to genuine, loving, strong male energy. It's not oppression, but they almost crave it. They crave to be led. And it's natural. It's the masculine, feminine. It's the yin and yang, but they crave to be led in love. Again, it's like a dance, not an order. It's like I say, you have to dance with the woman and let the rhythm guide you. She wants to see that you can read the rhythm and it flows through you, just like she wants to see how you can feel God's love, feel the virtue flowing through you, and she'll trust you. She doesn't want orders. And again, that's where we've got a bit too worldly on our expression of the Christian tradition. Bap, 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 do this, do that. Women won't respond to that. They'll become vengeful. That creates feminism. So as I'm saying, the real authority properly understood is in love, and that creates virtue in the men. And this is what we've really lacked in our day and age. And the way to turn that around isn't, oh, all of a sudden I believe in hierarchy and back to military. No, military aspects can be good in certain contexts. It's to recognize the true love and virtue will flow through that. It's opening yourself up to the true order of the tradition and God. And it will flow through you. And if it's with love, it won't come with do this, don't do that. It will come with this is what I believe, take it or leave it. And you'll find that's very well received by women very often, the feminine force. Because it doesn't feel it's being forced. It feels fine. I can trust in this authority. It's going to guide me. And I can feel safe in it. That it's not going to swallow me alive and bully me. Same with younger men. You know, if they're just going to get told what to do, they feel that this is just more military stuff. And then they're left with all the Guardianista feminist nonsense. What they need is that line of love, the virtue that's going to take them on their own journey of growth. Allow them to make mistakes, but give them that structure that they can come back to. This is why we need to turn away from this modern teaching that men are somehow all oppressive, we have no virtue, that patriarchy is oppressive. It's not true. It's just badly understood. So these are some of my thoughts. As always, let me know your comments down below. Do sign up to the Substack, having a free call on the group work, the 7 steps I'm doing there soon. Other than that, do subscribe to the channel and do enjoy the rest of your day. God bless, friends.